So during my first year of rabbinical school, which was 27 years ago this summer, I lived in an apartment that sat right on the boundary between two different neighborhoods in Jerusalem. One was very, very religious, and one was steadfastly secular. And so living where I did, right there on that seam between those two neighborhoods, meant that I got a front row seat to the small daily interactions between the two neighborhoods and their two cultures as the residents' paths crossed right outside my front door. And there was one character in particular who made regular appearances on my block. He passed by my apartment every day as he walked to synagogue in the Orthodox neighborhood. The man must have been 100 years old if he was a day, and every Shabbos, wearing a dark suit and a black hat, even in the heat of a Jerusalem summer, he made his way to shul, walking with a cane very, very slowly. It must have taken him hours to get there and back every week. And whenever a car came down the street, driven by someone from the secular side, since it was Shabbat, he would go through the following routine. First, as he walked, he would turn his head to hear the sound of the engine. Ever so slowly, he would turn his body toward the road. He would gingerly transfer his cane from his right hand to his left. And just as the car sped past, he would lock eyes with the driver, raise his right hand, and wag his finger as the car passed. Then he'd return the cane to his right hand and keep walking until the next car came by. In Israel, the practice of Judaism in public life defaults, as many of us know, to the established Orthodox standard there. And so for the millions of non-Orthodox Israelis, what Shabbat means is exactly that. An old man in a black hat telling you no. It is still the Orthodox rabbinate that determines when the buses stop running on Friday nights, what restaurants can be properly certified as kosher, whose marriage the state will recognize. The power of the Haredi parties and parliamentary coalitions has been enough to topple governments in the past, and it is enough to keep the current coalition snugly in power today. Even now, as Israel remains exhaustingly at war, an active debate is underway about whether Torah study in an Orthodox yeshiva should count as equivalent to military service. This spring, the Knesset passed a law allowing religious courts to sidestep the state's judicial system and allow religious leaders to arbitrate certain civil disputes. When the law passed, Yair Lapid, who's the current opposition leader, said bluntly, "There is a name for this when the power of the courts is handed over to the rabbis. It's called theocracy." The Haredi lawmakers who engineered the legislation disagreed, of course, and their perspective is that it's not theocracy, but liberty, for citizens to be granted the freedom to choose who has the authority to adjudicate their disagreements. So at its root, this isn't really a disagreement about judicial authority or the separation of powers. The real question that underlies this debate is, what does it mean to be free? This week's Torah portion gives us the itinerary of Israel's long journey through the wilderness. It recites a long list of names of the places through which they passed, one after another. They traveled from Ramesses and encamped at Sukkot. They traveled from Sukkot and encamped at Etam. They traveled from Etam and encamped somewhere else, and then somewhere else after that. This is the rhythm that underlies consistently every fragment of text. They journeyed here and they encamped there. They journeyed there and they encamped here. The Torah is determined to remember not only where our ancestors went, but also where they stopped, the places where they lowered their burdens and raised their tents, where they gathered their children close and rested from the journey. One of the great gifts of the Exodus was our ancestors' new freedom to travel wherever they wished. But freedom isn't just the ability to keep moving, it's also the ability to stop. Pharaoh was an expert at keeping people moving. He knew how to occupy every hour and every measure of human strength, how to turn human beings into instruments of endless production. Slavery was not stillness. Slavery was motion without destination, labor without rest, urgency without meaning. But Shabbat is an encampment. It's the place along the road where the journey pauses long enough for us to remember why we began it in the first place. This is why the Torah repeatedly connects Shabbat with the Exodus. The Ten Commandments tell us pointedly that we are to observe Shabbat because we were slaves in Egypt and because God brought us out of there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Shabbat doesn't wait until our work is finished because our work is never finished. It doesn't wait until the inbox is empty, the errands are done, the house is clean. Shabbat isn't a pleasant reward that we've earned at the end of a difficult week. It is a weekly refusal to return to Egypt. For one day, we refuse to believe that our obligations own us, or that every unoccupied hour represents a failure of ambition. For one day, we refuse to act like pharaohs to ourselves, driving ourselves harder, demanding one more task, one more accomplishment, one more email, before believing that we've done enough. Part of what makes the internal Israeli argument about public religion so difficult is that the biblical understanding about Shabbat is that it's meant to be wide-ranging and public. It has to make room for collective rest, but in a liberal democracy, a country must oppose religious coercion, must resist allowing holiness to feel like surveillance. For the spirit of Shabbat to be fulfilled, it has to offer us a place to encamp without building a wall around ourselves and stationing guards at its gates. We are American Jews, and so it's not our job to decide when the buses should run in Tel Aviv. But it is our job to decide what runs our lives. We decide how to draw boundaries around the things that are precious to us, whether we'll allow ourselves to be carried into the precious promised territory of a day of rest. We're familiar with Wordsworth's poem in which he wrote, "The world is too much with us late and soon. Getting and spending, we lay waste our powers." Wordsworth was blessedly unacquainted with the technological gifts of modern life that remind us with great frequency and great urgency about the dozens of different things that require our immediate attention. But Wordsworth knew that living a life in which the world is always too much with us presents a unique sort of spiritual peril. That over time, getting and spending, producing and responding gradually consumes the inner spaciousness from which creativity and resilience can emerge. Our days can easily become an unbroken sequence of responses to messages, to crises, to expectations, to the low-grade hum of anxiety that insists there's something else we ought to be doing. But Shabbat offers a counter-argument as an encampment in time, where the soul can catch up with the body that has been carrying it all week. It gives us a hand and invites us to step out of the current briefly and allow ourselves to stand on the bank of time as it rushes past. It attunes our ears to the rhythm of our forefathers. They journeyed, and then they encamped. All of us will start journeying again soon enough, too. The world will return after Shabbat with all of its noise and need, and there will be tasks and responsibilities that demand our time, acts of purpose and repair that will need our attention. But for now, all of us in here, have raised our tents in this encampment of time. The wilderness is growing quiet around us, and we can stop and breathe. I find myself thinking often about that old man outside my Jerusalem apartment, adjusting his cane to wag his finger and scold every car that rushed past. 27 years ago, I hated what I believed he represented at the time, an old man rebuking the secular world, a Judaism focused mainly on what it wants other people not to do. But today, with more perspective and more maturity, I think about him more charitably. Today, I like to imagine that underneath his reproach, underneath the disagreement that still rages about what a Jew should or should not do on Shabbat, there's another message, another signal telegraphed by his raised hand, by that tiny, frail barrier he placed against the speed of the world. And the message was simply, stop. Not because he thought that motion was sinful or that the road was forbidden, but because none of us can stay in motion forever without eventually forgetting where we are going. Maybe every Shabbat raises such a hand before us, the hand of time, asking us to stop before we speed past another evening, another morning, another day spent with the people we love. Stop to notice the scenery through which we are traveling before it disappears behind us. Shabbat tells us, you've traveled far enough for today. Lay down what you're carrying, let the dust settle around you, and let the noise grow quiet. The road will still be there when morning comes. For now, there's nowhere else you need to be. May this Shabbat become for us an encampment in time, a place where urgency releases its grip, where our souls can draw closer to the lives we often move too quickly to appreciate, a place where we may glimpse, however briefly, the world as it might be if every one of us were granted the dignity of rest beneath the sheltering presence of God. May this be the Shabbat that is granted us tonight, a Shabbat of abundance and gratitude and peace. Amen. Shabbat shalom, everyone.
Shabbat shalom.